All right, diving in today on something you guys specifically requested, so thanks for that, by the way. It's all about the why. We're taking a deep dive into a conversation between, well, you know him, Simon Sinek, Mr. Start With Why himself. And this time, he's talking to Stephen Bartlett. Over on Stephen's YouTube channel, The Diary of a CEO. Seems like a lot of you are trying to get a better handle on this whole why concept and really how to actually apply it to your own lives, which is where we come in.
Yeah, it's super interesting how they go back and forth about this because you've got Sinek bringing, years of research to the table, working with all kinds of different companies and organizations, right? And then there's Bartlett, who's coming at it from a totally different angle. His whole perspective is shaped by his own experiences and all those crazy deep conversations he has on his show.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're getting two totally different lenses on the same idea. So to kick things off, let's start with the basics. What exactly is a why in Sinek's world?
So he describes it as your driving purpose, the core reason you get out of bed every morning. Think of it kind of like the engine driving everything you do. It goes way beyond just what you do or even how you do it. It's the why behind all of it. And here's the thing. Sinek found that most people actually struggle to explain their why. They can't really put it into words.
It's so true. It's like it's there, this kind of fuzzy idea in the back of your mind, but then you try to explain it. It's like, poof, gone, like trying to catch smoke. Sinek actually shares a pretty personal story about this, about feeling lost, even though he looks successful from the outside. Makes you wonder, have you ever felt that way, like you're checking all the boxes, but still feeling kind of empty inside?
Oh, 100%. He talks about this point in his life, right? Decent career, good clients, making money. But he just felt totally unfulfilled, like actually dreaded getting up for work. And that was a turning point for him. That experience sent him on this mission to figure out this whole why thing.
So then Bartlett, being Bartlett, he throws this curveball into the conversation. He points out that sometimes this why can come from a place of trauma or insecurity even. He brings up a lot of the high-achieving athletes he's interviewed, like UFC champion Israel Adesanya comes to mind, who talk about how their rough childhoods actually fueled their drive to succeed. So it makes you wonder, is it possible your why can come from pain?
Sinek kind of acknowledges this, like, yeah, our early experiences definitely shape our why, but he makes this really important distinction. Your why, ultimately, is about striving towards something positive, not just running away from a painful past. It's reaching for something better, something that gives your life meaning.
Not just filling a void, but like a positive force that's pulling you forward, giving you direction. That's interesting. And this kind of leads into what both Sinek and Bartlett call the trap of arbitrary goals. Bartlett even tells this funny story about setting a goal to get a six-pack for summer.
Totally relatable, right? I mean, who hasn't set some crazy fitness goal? Just have the motivation fizzle out after like a week. Bartlett was really trying to figure out what is the secret to that consistent workout motivation, not just those short bursts.
Ugh, tell me about it. I set so many goals, ambitious goals, and I always end up right back on the couch a month later every time. Makes you think, what's the point? But Sinek's response to this really got me thinking. He actually kind of pushes back on this whole idea of self-improvement. He thinks the term puts way too much focus on those external goals, the ones that don't stick. He prefers self-awareness. For him, it's more about digging deeper and understanding your motivations and your values.
Instead of obsessing over getting that six-pack, the question becomes, why do I even want a six-pack? What's driving that? Is it about health, confidence, fitting in? It's about getting to the core of what you actually want, which honestly can be kind of uncomfortable.
And that's where Sinek brings in this whole idea of vulnerability. But he's not talking about the kind of vulnerability you see all over social media. It's not about broadcasting your feelings to the world. He even tells this funny story about this yoga instructor he met, who was totally glued to his phone during a meeting, but then wouldn't stop talking about being present.
Oh, that's classic Sinek. His point is that real vulnerability is about showing up authentically, especially when it's tough. It's having those difficult conversations where you let others see your true self, flaws and all. It's not easy, but it builds trust and deepens your connection with others.
And in the end, it serves both you and the other person. Which brings us to the idea of feedback, something Sinek is clearly super passionate about. He's a big believer in self-assessment, obviously. But he also stresses that it's not enough on its own. We need other people to help us see our blind spots. We need that outside perspective.
He talks about this fascinating system used by the Army Rangers to identify what they call spotlight rangers. These are the guys who shine when they know they're being watched, like when an instructor's around. But then their behavior totally changes when no one's looking.
So like
Um,
how we might behave differently around our boss compared to how we act with our close friends, right? We all have
yeah.
those moments where we're not quite living up to our own standards. But in a work setting, think about the impact. It makes me think about, well,
Well, think about it this way. Well, think about it this way. If you're leading a team and you've got some spotlight rangers in the mix, it can really erode trust. You know
right.
what I mean?
Mm.
It creates this inconsistent environment where people don't know which version of their colleague they're going to get, the one who shines or the one who slacks off. The Army Rangers use peer reviews to try and catch this kind of inconsistency. And Sinek actually brought a similar 360 feedback process into his own company.
He's really big on framing feedback as a gift, even when it's hard to hear, right? Like it's about helping each other grow and become more self-aware. And speaking of uncomfortable truths, Sinek throws out this challenge, and it's kind of stuck with me ever since. He calls it the no lying challenge.
Aha, yeah. This one's good. Try not to tell a single lie, even a tiny one, for a whole 48 hours. Not even those little white lies we tell ourselves are harmless.
It sounds easy enough, right?
Huh?
But when I really started paying attention, I was like, wow, I tell way more of those little white lies than I realized. It's almost automatic. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we so quick to fudge the truth, even in small ways? What's that all about?
That's what Sinek's getting at. He thinks it points to a deeper issue he calls ethical fading. It's like this slippery slope where we start rationalizing unethical choices while convincing ourselves we're still being ethical. It's
Uh-huh.
kind of messed up.
So you're basically bending the rules without even realizing you're heading into shady territory.
Exactly. And it often starts small with leadership, maybe cutting corners or telling those little white lies. Then it just trickles down through the whole organization. We've seen this happen time and time again with those big corporate scandals, right? The consequences can be devastating.
Like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time,
Yeah.
right? But it's not just about big corporations, is it? Bartlett shares a pretty personal story about how white lies in a romantic relationship led to a lot of resentment and unmet expectations.
Yeah.
Haven't we all been there at some point?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's that whole conflict avoidance thing that Sinek talks about. He sees it as super common with younger generations, even. He gives the example of young employees choosing to quit their jobs rather than having a tough conversation with their boss about a raise.
Seriously. It's
Okay.
like it's easier to ghost your boss than to actually confront the issue head on. Sinek thinks this is part of a bigger cultural shift where we're losing the ability or maybe the willingness to have those crucial, uncomfortable conversations that are necessary for growth.
And that leads into the whole great resignation thing, which Sinek sees as more than just people following their dreams. He thinks it's a sign that people are rejecting a work culture that feels hollow or unfulfilling. They're not settling for just okay anymore, and I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially after the past few years.
Totally. It's like people got a taste of a different way of living and working during the pandemic, and they realized that maybe fine wasn't good enough anymore.
Yeah.
But going back to work culture for a sec, Sinek makes this really interesting point about how companies often mistake perks and amenities for actual culture.
He's saying those things are nice to have, don't get me wrong, but they don't get to the heart of what people are really craving, a sense of belonging, a connection to a purpose that's bigger than themselves.
It's like those arbitrary goals we were talking about before. They might give you a temporary boost, but they don't create that deep sense of fulfillment. So what's the solution? How do you create a workplace where people feel connected and energized?
Sinek thinks companies need to give their employees a cause to get behind, something they can really believe in, not just a list of tasks to check off. You know what I mean? What are you most passionate about? What kind of work gets you fired up and makes you feel like you're making a difference? That's the kind of energy companies need to tap into.
It makes you think about what you're really looking for in a job.
Mm.
It's not to say that things like hitting targets and being number one are bad things,
Yeah.
but Sinek and Bartlett agree that the why has to come first. If chasing those goals starts to compromise the bigger purpose, that's a problem.
They even use Bartlett's own podcast as an example. Initially, his motivations for starting the podcast were things like building his brand and enjoying those raw, honest conversations with interesting people, which are great reasons, but
But as the podcast grew, he had this realization. The real why behind it all was about giving people a platform to share their truths and feel less alone in their struggles. That's a powerful why.
totally.
Yeah.
And that realization changed everything for him. Suddenly hitting number one on the podcast charts became less important than creating a space for vulnerability and authentic connection.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the listener for a minute. If you're struggling to articulate your own why, where do you even begin?
Sinek's advice is to start by paying attention to what energizes you. What are those activities that make you lose track of time? What kind of work do you find yourself doing even when you don't have to? Those are clues to your deeper motivations.
It's like those moments when you're so absorbed in something that you totally forget to eat or check your phone. What is it about those activities that makes them so captivating?
Exactly. And if you're thinking, well, my job is a soul-sucking grind, I don't have any of those moments, Sinek would probably challenge you to look a little deeper. He believes that everyone has something that lights them up, even if it's not directly related to their work. It could be a hobby, a volunteer activity, even a specific way of interacting with people.
He also suggests looking back at your past experiences, both the good and the bad. What events have shaped who you are today? What values have guided your decisions? It's about making those connections between your past and your present to uncover those deeper motivations.
And this is where it can get a little uncomfortable, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
It might involve revisiting some painful memories or facing some hard truths about yourself. But that discomfort is often a sign that you're on the right track. It means you're peeling back the layers and getting closer to the core of who you are.
I love that. It's not about running from discomfort, but seeing it as a guidepost. But this isn't a one-and-done exercise, right?
Right. It's important to remember that this is a journey, not a destination. Your why isn't something you figure out once and then you're done. It's something that evolves and deepens over time as you have new experiences and learn more about yourself.
So it's like that concept of self-awareness that Sinek talked about. It's an ongoing process. So once you have a clearer picture of your why, what's the next step?
That's when you start aligning your actions with those values with your why. This might mean making changes in your career, your relationships, even your daily routine. It's about making choices that are consistent with your deeper purpose, even if they're not always the easiest or most convenient choices.
Which might lead to some of those tough conversations we were talking about earlier. Maybe you need to talk to your boss about your role or have a heart-to-heart with a loved one about your needs and expectations. Sounds daunting.
It can be, but remember, those conversations are crucial for building trust and creating genuine connections. And they're ultimately a form of service, as Sinek puts it. You're giving the other person a chance to see you more fully, to understand where you're coming from.
And you might even inspire them to do some soul-searching of their own right.
Oh.
It's easy to get caught up in the theory of all this, but how does it actually play out in the real world?
Yeah.
How do you balance your why with the demands of your job, your family, all the other responsibilities you're juggling?
That's the million-dollar question, and unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's going to require some experimentation and adjustments along the way.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between your values and your obligations.
Yes. But Sinek is adamant that you should never compromise your core values, those fundamental beliefs that define who you are at your core.
But what if you're in a situation where you feel like you're constantly having to violate your own ethical code? What then?
That's a huge red flag. It's a sign that something needs to change. Maybe that means having a difficult conversation with your boss, looking for a new job, or even taking the leap to start your own business. The point is, you have choices, and you don't have to settle for a life that feels misaligned with what you believe in.
And speaking of choices, one of those powerful choices you can make is to surround yourself with people who support and inspire you. It goes back to that idea of finding your tribe that Sinek talked about. We thrive on connection.
Absolutely. We're wired for it. Find those people who share your values, who challenge you to grow, and who celebrate your wins. And just as importantly, be that kind of person for others.
Offer support, encouragement, honest feedback. Create a space where people feel safe to be themselves, flaws and all. And this isn't about being perfect or having all the answers, right?
Not at all. It's about trying to be a little bit better each day, a little more aligned with your why, a little more courageous in your interactions with others. It's a journey, and it will have its bumps along the way, but it's so worth it.
It makes you think about those Spotlight Rangers again. If they had a stronger sense of their why, maybe those inconsistencies wouldn't be so pronounced. Maybe they'd feel more comfortable being their authentic selves all the time.
It's definitely possible. We've been focusing a lot on the individual why, but what about the why of an organization? How does this concept apply on a larger scale?
That's a great question, and it's something that Sinek has dedicated a lot of time and energy to exploring. He firmly believes that organizations, just like individuals, need a clear and compelling why to truly thrive.
And it can't just be about profit margins or market domination. It needs to be something deeper, something that resonates with both employees and customers.
He uses Apple as a prime example. Their why isn't just about making sleek devices. It's about empowering individuals to think differently and challenge the status quo.
And that why is woven into everything they do, from their product design to their marketing. Is why they attract such passionate employees and have such a loyal customer base. People believe in their mission.
So it's not just about what you're selling, it's about the bigger story you're telling.
Exactly. And that story needs to be communicated clearly, both internally and externally.
It's not enough to just have a fancy mission statement hanging on the wall. It needs to be lived and breathed by everyone in the organization.
And that's where leadership comes in. Leaders have the responsibility to not only define the organization's why, but also to embody it in their own actions and decisions. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
They need to be the living, breathing example of what the company stands for, inspiring others to follow suit, which, let's be real, is a tall order, especially in today's world.
It is. But as Sinek and Bartlett both emphasize, it's more important now than ever. In a world that's increasingly dominated by technology automation and the pursuit of short-term gains, we need leaders who can remind us of our shared humanity and inspire us to create a better future.
It's about finding that balance between purpose and profit, between individual fulfillment and collective success.
And it all starts with understanding our why, both as individuals and as organizations.
Now, I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about something else Sinek and Bartlett discussed that I think is super relevant, especially in today's dating culture. They talk about ghosting.
Oh yeah, that sudden disappearance act. It's become so commonplace, especially with online dating and social media. It's easy to connect, but it's also incredibly easy to disconnect.
And it's painful. You're left wondering what went wrong, feeling rejected and confused.
But as Sinek points out, it's a form of dishonesty. It goes against everything we've been talking about: vulnerability, authenticity, having those tough conversations.
It's the ultimate form of conflict avoidance, right?
Yeah.
Just disappearing instead of facing the discomfort of a conversation.
Exactly. And while it might seem easier in the moment, ghosting has consequences. The person being ghosted feels hurt and confused, and the person doing the ghosting reinforces a pattern of avoidance and emotional detachment.
Which can make it harder to build healthy relationships in the future. It's like you're carrying that baggage with you.
Sinek encourages us to be more courageous in our communication, even when it's hard, to have those difficult conversations with honesty and compassion, even if it means risking rejection or conflict.
It's like that no lying challenge, but applied to relationships. It's about being truthful in all our interactions, even the seemingly small ones. Because those little acts of dishonesty can erode trust and create a culture of secrecy and avoidance.
And that can have a ripple effect, impacting not just our personal relationships, but also our communities and even society as a whole.
So how do we break free from this cycle of ghosting and avoidance? What's the antidote?
Sinek's message is clear. We need to be more upfront with our intentions, more willing to have those uncomfortable conversations, and more respectful of each other's feelings, even when things don't work out the way we hoped.
It's a call for more honesty, more vulnerability, more courage in our interactions, which, let's be honest, is easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But as we've been exploring in this deep dive, the rewards of living a more authentic and purpose-driven life are immense. And it all starts with understanding and embracing our why.
Wow, it feels like we've covered a ton of ground already. But I'm curious, what really stood out to you from that whole conversation? Was there anything that particularly resonated?
Oh, definitely. So many great points. But towards the end, Sinek asks this question that kind of hit me hard, you know?
You mean when he asks, how will you know you've lived a life worth living?
Exactly. It really makes you think, right? It's not about achievements or fancy stuff. It's about what truly matters, your impact on the world, your legacy.
He even says, for him, it'll be if his work keeps making a difference, even when he's gone. If his ideas keep inspiring others to make positive change, that's how he'll know.
And it makes you ask yourself, what will your own legacy be? What impact do you want to have? It's a big question, kind of daunting, but worth considering, for sure.
It's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day, to forget about the bigger picture. Sinek and Bartlett, they really bring you back to that. Like, what are we actually working towards?
Yeah, it's about figuring out those things that truly matter, your values, your passions, and making sure your actions line up with those.
And having those tough conversations, even when it's uncomfortable, with your boss, a loved one, even yourself.
Totally. Embracing the vulnerability, being honest about your flaws, showing up authentically, and remembering you're not alone in this. We all have a why, even if we haven't fully figured it out yet.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface here. So much to unpack from their conversation.
I know, right? This deep dive's been a great start, but Sinek's written tons of books and given amazing talks on this topic. If you're ready to go deeper, definitely check those out.
Absolutely. His work is so thought-provoking. I know you guys will get a lot out of it. But before we go, we'd love to hear from you. What resonated with you most from this conversation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this going.
Yeah. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another episode exploring something else you guys care about. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep striving to live a life that's true to your why.